This podcast contains spoilers, so listen at your own risk or call back after you've watched the movie.
You know who you call. Leave a message. Maybe they'll call you back. Then again, maybe they won't.
We're having ourselves quite a little game of phone tag here.
Ring, ring, ring. I usually get this guy's answering machine.
I'll call you right back.
If you're there, please pick up the phone. I really want to talk to you.
I check my fucking messages every day when I come home from work. My answering machine, zero. I got a blinking light.
All I have to do is pick up this phone right here, inform the cinema, and your plan's kaput.
No, I ain't got no phone. I had to pull, because people calling all the time, and who needs the aggravation, right? Interruptions.
Hey, man. It's just coming up on 7 p.m. on a warm summer's evening. I'm walking back from the cinema. This might be a bit of a weird voice note. I'm very tired because I've been up since, I think, about 3:30 this morning. And I'm on kind of busy roads. So there might be a lot of background noise, although it's late enough that there's not too many cars. Just come out, or, well, I guess it's coming up on an hour since I finished watching the Odyssey, the new Chris Nolan movie, probably the most high-profile movie of the year. I feel like it's one of the bigger cinema releases of the past 10 years. Nolan sort of got to that level where, and he's the only current living director where this is the case, where just his name alone is a kind of blockbuster event. I don't think anyone else quite has that status. Denis Villeneuve hasn't made a non-IP movie for many, many years, and his next one is James Bond. Well, his next one's Dune, and then James Bond. So, I guess like in the art house sphere, you got the likes of Wes Anderson, but in terms of kind of blockbuster, like anticipated to be one of the highest grossing films of the year, Nolan movies are a big event. I, as you know, am a bit of a Nolan hater, and I was in two minds to even go see this movie. Now this movie has sort of loomed large in the film buff consciousness for at least a year. I mean, the tickets went on sale a year ago today, and were instantly sold out for all the IMAX screenings. But even long before that, there was, as soon as this movie's announced, literally just write the words "The Odyssey," directed by Chris Nolan, on a piece of paper, and with no more data to work from, you've already got massive amounts of discussion and anticipation. So, very, very hotly anticipated film in general. And even as someone who had very little faith that they would like it, had very little interest in ever seeing it, I have talked about it an enormous amount, primarily with yourself. I think everyone must be aware of this movie coming out, and everyone's kind of part of the conversation. I like that as well. I don't think we get enough of that nowadays. I really kind of wish, I caught maybe the tail end of it with certain movies, but I think I missed the sort of heyday of things like E.T. and Back to the Future and Star Wars, the original trilogy coming out, and just like everyone talking about it and going crazy for it. So it's nice now with things like GTA 6 and the Odyssey that there are these massive big things that come out and everyone sort of has a chat about it. Even in TV, I feel like we haven't really got that since Game of Thrones, which I might bring up again later in this voice note. So yeah, I've been talking about it quite a bit, especially in the last few weeks, because I don't get to go to the cinema much, but it just so happens that my family have gone away on holidays and I'm here on my own with a hell of a lot of time at my disposal, and Perhaps I would have gone to see this film anyway. I'm not sure. Perhaps I would have been swayed, like I said, by that big cultural conversation and the inevitable avalanche of 5-star reviews and, you know, declarations of masterpiece, one of the best movies of all time, that tends to meet a Nolan release. Sometimes it's just like, okay, all right, I'll watch it. But with my family gone, it all just kind of like lined up really well. And I was thinking, okay, maybe I'll watch it, but I'll watch it like, you know, it will be out for ages because it's such a big movie. I'll watch it like 6 weeks into its run when nobody's there anymore and I can have the whole cinema to myself and all the rest of it. But sometimes a screening just kind of like works out perfectly. You know that? I mean, you know it more than anyone. When you find that screening where you're like, no, that's exactly when I want to see that movie. It just fits in with my life, especially in the midst of the World Cup. It's on a day where there's no football. It's on a day that I finish work early, and I clocked off work and hot-tailed it down for a 2:50 p.m. screening, or at least that's when the program started. So the movie itself would have kicked off at about 3:20. Big screen, and, you know, a smattering of people. Lots of the rows had 0 viewers, and the row I was in only had 2 people, me on my own and another guy on his own. And you can really see the young men on their own or in little groups. When you go see a Nolan, when even just like walking around that retail park now after the movie, I'm seeing these little groups of like 1 or 2 or 3 young men. I'm like, okay, there's a Chris Nolan movie in the cinema. So yeah, good scenario, good setup, respectful audience. Didn't hear a peep out of anyone. Didn't even hear a crisp bag crunch. So it was definitely a good time to go see it. Well, as I said, I've been up since 3:30 this morning, so I was bracing myself for a kind of taxing experience on an energy level. It's 3 hours long, and one of my many pet hates about Nolan and about blockbuster cinema is movies being too long. I mean, you get into the movie I watched last night, which I kind of live streamed to you through voice notes as well, which will probably have colored my experience today a little bit. But yeah, I'll just talk a little bit about my history with Nolan and my feelings going into this movie. So he came out, obviously his first movie was Following, but he really exploded onto the scene in terms of like everyone knowing him with Memento, his second movie, which I absolutely adored. I remember getting on DVD as soon as it came out, watching it over and over again. And he was, I don't know if I can say just like, put it in such absolute terms as he was my favorite director, but he was certainly in the mix of my favorite directors at that time. I think the next one after Memento was Insomnia, which I thought was fine. And I've since watched the original of Insomnia, which is a million times better. But yeah, the remake is solid. And then was it The Prestige or was it Batman Begins? You know, he was bringing out these movies which are at the very least good and sometimes great. And it kind of peaked for me personally with this 1-2 punch of The Dark Knight and then Inception. Those 2 movies in a row. And bear in mind, this is already a director who I'm a big fan of, already a director who I deem to have made a masterpiece, one of my favorite movies of that era in Memento. So then on top of that, reaching like a much bigger stage and like bigger budget and everything like that, he knocks out 2 of the best cinema experiences I've had probably in my life, like just incredible blockbuster films. And yeah, I was head over heels in love with him. And for one reason or another, it's been all downhill for me since then, pretty abruptly as well. Now, I know that I'm probably the only person in the world who isn't a big fan of Interstellar, and you've said to me that I should rewatch it and maybe I'll appreciate it more now. My father, like, I'm completely open to it. It's quite close in release to films by him that I think are masterpieces, but it really just, as soon as you get into Dark Knight Rises and then Interstellar and basically everything after Inception for me, I just haven't liked, really hasn't clicked with me. So it has, other than Tenet, they have clicked with everybody else more or less, not literally everyone else, but you know, as they have about as universal adoration as you could possibly get with a big movie. Like, critics love it, audiences love it. He is probably the most beloved and popular director in the world right now as we speak, and I just haven't been on that train for a very, very long time. But I would probably struggle to like properly articulate everything that I don't like about him, but just a few examples. I find his movies too long. I find his obsession with puzzle box, like plot construction or like movie construction, to be incredibly frustrating. So for example, you've got Dunkirk, which is got so much technical mastery and is so beautiful at times, but he just can't resist making it like this weird time construction where you're watching like sort of three parallel stories that are kind of running at different speeds and converging in a confusing way, and it's like, it's so out of place in that movie. It's so working against the immersive immediacy of that film, in my opinion. You've got Oppenheimer, which you've got a central, quite compelling subject of this guy who's basically caused the most destruction of any man in human history, and how does he get to that point and how does he reckon with it? And then you give a third of the movie over to the Robert Downey Jr. character, who is barely involved in his life, just a very minor bit part cameo that really has nothing to do with the story, but it's again just so we can have the black and white and the color, and we can go back and forth and we can be playing with, you know, the construction of the movie. And obviously Tenet and Interstellar are steeped in that. And like I said, I was a huge fan of Memento when it came out, so it's not that I haven't liked him doing this type of thing. I like The Prestige, I like Memento, but it's kind of like Tarantino with his long like monologues and stuff, where it's like, that was what I liked about you, and now I don't like when you do it because you've overindulged in it, and it's just sort of, you're putting it in every single movie even when it really doesn't belong there at all. So I find his movies to be like constantly getting away from what is good about the movie, or what I like about the movie. The sound mixing of the dialogue, it's obviously been talked about a lot. I find that kind of stuff just really frustrating and kind of condescending almost. Like that you go see a movie in the cinema where his films are really designed to be seen, and you can't hear the important lines of dialogue that people are saying, because he wants to have a more authentic and immersive, like kind of you know, impressionistic, like this is what it would really sound like if someone was in the cockpit of a World War II plane or something. But yeah, there's a lot of things, but they all come together in me watching his movies, just finding them long and boring and very lacking in any kind of reason to give a shit about the movie. Like, I just don't have a entry point to them usually. And I will say that, acknowledging that his films have so much to admire in all of his films, even Tenet, his current cinematographer, Hoyte van Hoytema, and then Wally Pfister, who he made lots of films with previously, they've both done incredible work. The films are gorgeous, like most of them at least. The scores, especially the Hans Zimmer ones, he's now moved over to Göransson, who seems to do every blockbuster now, but the stuff he's done with Hans Zimmer has been absolutely phenomenal. The casting is great. Now, I do think that the acting maybe gets a little overrated, but that's just people love his movies and they think that his movies are the best movies around. So of course, every element's working for them to the nth degree. But I love the actors that he works with. He's always cramming it full of all these like brilliant people. So there's a lot I like about him. But surely the most important thing is that you like the movies, right? It's not enough to just like many things about them. You have to like the movie as well. And I haven't liked his movies for a long time. So I presumed I was going to dislike this one. 3 hours long. I'm not into sort of myths and legends, like that type of stuff. I don't like. I generally don't even like fantasy, like more modern fantasy stuff of like wizards and stuff. But, you know, that's maybe I've seen that in lots of different sensibilities, and I found stuff that I like more. But this specifically, films or TV, I guess, but I'm thinking of films here that are adapted from ancient stories, whether it's like this one where it's like we know who wrote it and it's a single literary work, or it's just more of a like this was a myth that, you know, was handed down over time. I don't like that. I don't know why. Obviously people love it, but if I'm seeing something that's like we're fighting the Cyclops, or we're fighting this god, or, you know, this is happening, Loki stole this, and, you know, like Odin's done that, and like I just find that really unrelatable, which is kind of maybe goes that saying, but like I can't see the entry point into it. And a lot of these stories are, I think they were poignant at the time, and they've held their poignancy for many people because they speak to, they're not just a simple like, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. They're supposed to be kind of allegorical or symbolic, or, you know, it's about the themes and stuff like that. But if that's not kind of like bearing out in the way that it's shown, if it more just feels like it's just like a plot-based thing, then I don't really enjoy it. So there was a hell of a lot that I wasn't excited about when it came to this movie. It's also famously, and people have been talking about this for like a year now, or at least 6 months, it's famously very anachronistic. Well, on every level, I think, lots of stuff that I wouldn't have much of a reference point for, where people are going like, that's not the helmets they would have worn and stuff. But also things that feel a bit strange, like the use of words like mum and dad, or mom and dad, all American accents in this. A very contemporary looking cast. I know that there was a very, very, very celebrated translation of the Odyssey that came out relatively recently. I don't know how recently, but, you know, even if it's from the last 20 years, that's very recently in terms of the history of that work. And the woman who made it used very contemporary language. And her argument, which I think is pretty brilliant, to be honest, was that the normal impulse of using an older English, let's say the English from 100 years ago or 200 years ago, well, if you compare that to how old the Odyssey is, then the English of 200 years ago is more or less equally as modern as the English of 2026. So it's only that one of them sort of tricks your brain into thinking that that's how they spoke back then, right? Because they're saying father instead of dad. But no, actually, like, both of them are a complete abandonment of how they spoke back then. And Chris Nolan, I think, that was like his main source text that he was working from and that he read and that kind of he wanted to adapt. So I was a bit, it raised eyebrows for me, the anachronistic stuff, but because I didn't have much skin in the game and I didn't think I was going to like the movie in any case, I guess I wasn't thinking about that a great deal. Like Travis Scott is in it. In fact, he's the first person that we hear and see in the movie, I believe. Maybe I'm wrong. Yeah, no, I think he is. So anyway, going into the film, very low expectations, but also, like, I'm always happy to go to the cinema. I don't get to go that often. Like I said, the stars kind of aligned. Get to watch a 3-hour movie in the cinema, and you won't even be just like falling asleep by the end of it because you're starting to watch it at like 3:20 in the afternoon. So it's all kind of working out for me in that regard. I guess I'll start talking through the movie now. So it kicks off quite intensely. Now it does at the beginning do more of that Nolan, we're jumping around, we want you to be a bit kind of like leaning forward in your seat, trying to piece it together and like work to get on even footing with the movie, because we've got Travis Scott telling the story of the Trojan horse. Then we flash to Elliot Page scene gifting the Trojan horse to the Trojans, I guess, right? Or isn't it not the Trojans? I forget what the actual people are, and they're not in it really, except for Zendaya, who is eventually revealed was like their queen. But I was expecting more of characters from that peoples. But anyway, we're over here, we're over there. We get to one thing that you notice straight away. Like I'm looking at this room, I'm looking around this room, and we got Leguizamo, I believe, is in that scene. We've got Travis Scott. We've got Robert Pattinson. We've got Anne Hathaway. We've got Spider-Man, whatever he's called. We have, I believe, the guy who played Dr. Dre in that movie Straight Outta Compton. And I'm even spotting other little character actors that I don't know the name of, that I'm like, oh, that must have seen that guy in Game of Thrones or something. And I'm like, this is just one fucking room of this movie. We're not even got the lead actor on screen yet. So it's fucking jam-packed full of people that you know. And it's going here and there, and it's moving around. And it has to do that. Now, of course, I haven't read the original novel or poem or whatever, but at least the plot of this movie moves around through time and space a lot, which we know that Nolan has a proclivity for. But I thought this would be the beginning of my sort of like turning around my tone from quite negative expectations to how I felt about the movie. I felt that it did a really elegant job of managing the shifts through location and time. It's very like simple. It's very, very simple. And I will commend Nolan for once making a simple movie. This movie doesn't need to be overcomplicated. So he'll just do one line of dialogue in a scene, and that gets you into a completely different part of the world or the universe or time or whatever. Just one little bridging line of dialogue, and then we're in we're in the other place, and it's just woven together really elegantly. And I felt when I was immersed in one part of the world, I didn't feel I was being dragged away from where I wanted to be, and I didn't feel like it was going on too long. Let's get back to what's going on over here. I was just like very living in the moment, kind of engaging with that. And then when they sort of shifted away from that to somewhere else, I didn't feel like, oh, that was a bit abrupt. Like, you know, sometimes in TV shows where you've got a whole bunch of different characters that are in different areas and they keep on kind of switching back. Okay, the next 10 minutes are going to be about these characters. It feels a bit mechanical, kind of like you can sort of see if the switch being flipped. I thought this one, they just wove it together really well. And as I say, I'll really want to compliment him again, because he has been, for me, and I get for almost no one else, but for me, he's been absolutely insufferable in his like obsession with over complicating narratives. And here, I think he has, it's not a complex narrative, but it is a long and eventful story. And he doesn't try and put the Chris Nolan puzzle box stamp on it. And that's one of my absolute biggest pet hates about his work. So to kind of like get that out of the equation, you're already like massively inviting me back to the party, to the Nolan party. So yeah, we've got 2 stories, kind of 3 stories running in tandem. One story is Matt Damon in the present day with, is it Calypso that is the name of the character, I think, that Charlize Theron plays. I can't believe how good Charlize Theron still looks after all these years. Like, literally looks like she could have just like come out right now and she would be like one of the hottest actresses in Hollywood. But we've got her and him sort of on a beach, with him having visions of Zendaya, remembering the events of the Odyssey. We've got Spider-Man trying to go find out if his father's dead by going on his own sort of little adventure, and in order to prevent this horrible situation where the Ithaca kingdom is going to fall into the hands of one of these horrible suitors, more than likely Robert Pattinson, who I'll get into in a bit. And then we've got kind of the main show. I presume this is what takes up the lion's share of the actual poem itself. The Odyssey, the adventure that they went on after the events of the Trojan War, the journey home that Odysseus goes on with his 3 boats full of men. And that's kind of like the main show, as I said. Now, I'd be interested to know how that's all sort of weighted out in the book, because the Odyssey stuff, I'll just call it that, is very much a sort of fairy tale. It doesn't follow modern plotting. Of course, it's like a very, very old story, but it's not that you wouldn't write that story now for adults. They're fighting a giant, then they're seeing some mermaids, stuff like that. Like, we just don't really do that kind of thing. Whereas the Spider-Man plot is Game of Thrones. It's like conspiring and like mustache twirling bad guys, and we've got to get these weapons out of the way before this or whatever. You know, it's pure Game of Thrones. And then the Charlize Theron plot is kind of a framing device. The weakest part of the movie, I would say, but a satisfying conclusion when we get this kind of her confession and reveal. And it's not given a third of the screen time; it's given less. But I felt a bit bored whenever we got back to that stuff, because I'm like, okay, he doesn't know where he is. He doesn't really know what's going on. We don't really know what's up, and we're not really progressing that forward at all. Now, the Odyssey stuff, so like fighting the Cyclops monster thing, or going to that island or whatever it is with all the giants, or Samantha Morton with an English accent, Spider-Man with an English accent, or no, American accent, both of them with American accents. Every actor or actress, like Lupita Nyong'o, who's English in this, is doing an American accent, which is a really bizarre choice. Like, I'm so used to seeing those actors do American accents that it's not like too surreal, but I wonder, was that like a deliberate look? None of these people would have looked remotely like this, ethnically speaking. They wouldn't be speaking this language. So at that point, let's go whole hog. Let's give them American, like, Hollywood accents. Maybe that was the logic. I don't know. That it was an interesting decision to do that, especially seeing as it's usually the other way around. Even if you're an American actor, you have to do an English accent in something like this, because we've just accepted that the English accent is the old ancient world accent in an English language movie, at least. So that adventure, that Odyssey stuff, which is all magical adventures and stuff, I liked it fine. I thought the Samantha Morton episode was brilliant. I thought the bit where they're fighting the army of giants was really cool to see, like, just quite intense, but it only lasts for like 2 minutes. I thought the Cyclops bit with the sheep in the cave was okay. I actually thought it was Sean Harris, and I checked, it wasn't. It's a different actor who has been in a whole bunch of things, but yeah, I thought, like, all that stuff was like, this is good. I like this. I compare the movie, I just naturally felt compelled to compare the movie to Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy, which has a lot of this kind of episodic, now we're in this scrape with this creature or this, you know, location or whatever. Now we're over here, now we're over there. I prefer the Lord of the Rings at that stuff. I felt like I cared more about the characters in the Lord of the Rings. Like this one, it's kind of Matt Damon and then just a bunch of guys. Like, I don't really have much investment in the other characters. I thought like, obviously I'm not going to, far be it from me to criticize like the most important piece of literature ever in history, but it is thousands of years old. So maybe we've kind of learned a thing or two since then, that's, you know, that maybe you can make things even a bit more interesting and dynamic. But it's cool stuff. Lots of good visuals. I like the focus on hardship. Like, it's almost like Lone Survivor or something, where they keep on losing guys. There's a few things I do like about it. Like, the character of Odysseus, I think, is strong. No pun intended. In fact, no pun executed in a way, because even though he's physically strong, he's so, compared to your normal protagonist in a movie like this, he's much more fallible. I felt like he does not have this magic charisma that lead to his men being completely unquestioning of him. That they seem like smart guys. They often feel like he's making bad decisions and he's letting them down. And I suppose this is going to be like a Rorschach test, but for me as an audience member, I felt the same way. I was like, I don't think that's what you should be saying or doing at this moment. So it's really interesting seeing a movie like this where the hero isn't perfect. Usually the only way that they're imperfect is they make one mistake or something you got to learn from. But this guy's just like, yeah, there's debate to be had about his like his decision making and his strategy throughout the movie. Definitely not like overall bad leader. So I'm not saying anything extreme here. I'm just saying it's much more nuanced and shades of gray than I was expecting, and that I typically get to see in a movie like this. I also love that he's not a complete superhero. Like, if you put him in a fight with something, one of those giant soldiers or the Cyclops or whoever it might be, he is not necessarily going to best them, because these are the incredibly formidable challenges that he's facing. And by the end of the movie, where we get full-blown John Wick Matt Damon, that I feel like they've used a lot of him not being a complete indestructible superhero that can just like cut down millions of giants at whim. So when you get to that, you sort of feel the stakes a lot more. So I liked all that work that they did with his character. And the actor, I'm a fan of Matt Damon, obviously being, following him since the likes of Good Will Hunting, and have enjoyed a bunch of his performances, a bunch of his movies. Don't really have anything negative to say about him in a general sense. I thought in this he was decent, and I've certainly seen movies where the main hero character is not decent and is not a good actor and not bringing anything. So he doesn't, in my opinion, he doesn't weaken this movie. And I think in terms of the gravitas and the wisdom and the aura and the legend, almost like mythical level big boots character, I think that there could have been better actors to do that, both contemporary and then just like throughout movie history. I think that we've seen better examples of someone delivering on that job, but I also think that it could have been worse. So there is the anachronistic thing where he's like, when's he gonna stop talking like he's from Boston? Like, get out of the car. But you buy it. He kind of has the look down, and there's also so many recognizable people that you're used to seeing in very modern kind of stuff. So that's just all over the movie. So yeah, he was fine. He was, I would say, better than fine, but also like I'm leaving room for, I think there is better versions of that character over time that have that more depth and more gravitas or whatever. I really, really liked the bad guys, the suitors, and it is mainly Robert Pattinson in maybe a career best role. I did say recently that Tenet was maybe his best work, so this is like completely different character, same director obviously, and we were talking the other night actually about how Ryan Reynolds is so unlikable that if some director could harness that, he could be such a great villain if they can take what is unlikable about him and put that in a movie. Now, from looking at interviews and stuff like that, I don't have any dislike of Robert Pattinson as a person. He seems really nice, and he seems like a lovely guy. So I'm not saying that I think he is unlikable, but I find him as an actor very hard to like, very hard to invest in and get behind and kind of want the best for him and stuff like that. And I find him a bit too full of himself creatively, which I think I don't think that's a character flaw at all. I just think the outcome in performances is sometimes very evident with the ridiculous accents he does and stuff like that. So there's a lot of that stuff, a lot of that those feelings that I have and those kind of assumptions I have about him and stuff really seems to be like making this better. I'm not saying I was making the performance better through my perception. I think that the casting, the directing of the role, and what Robert Pattinson brings to the table made this like a fantastic villain. Just like this pathetic, weak, sniveling, like of that archetype, that type of villain. This is one of the best I've seen. And and right up to his death scene where, you know, they puts the lot in his mouth and his look on his face at that point, and he just kills it the whole way through the movie. Quite menacing, quite threatening, and then ultimately so satisfying as like the foil to Matt Damon and everything that Matt Damon sort of stands for. So the final third of the movie is set back in Ithaca, I believe it's called, and that's when we've gone into full-blown samurai movie or martial arts movie, where it's like, I'm the lonely beggar, but I have a history, no one knows it, but if you push me, you test me, like I can take down a whole room of you motherfuckers. Like, that is brilliant. You've got this motif that they build up throughout the movie of the strumming of the bow to give your prey warning to make it an honorable hunt or whatever. That strum he does that tells everyone in the room, and both people that are immensely threatened by this revelation and people who are immensely encouraged by this revelation, everyone in the room getting that reveal through this epic strum, which has been a good sound effect throughout the movie, but is amped up massively in that scene. That was so stirring. Like, that's goosebumps shit. That honestly is one of the most emotional I've been watching kind of like an action moment, or like a you know, thriller exciting moment, rather than a pure sentimental scene or whatever. And then the ensuing carnage, Anne Hathaway shutting the doors, the mayhem, I mean, it's very Harakiri, Death of a Samurai. There's just one guy in a room, and it doesn't matter how many other people there are, they're just going to increasingly figure out that the odds are in his favor. Even the, like, your Odysseus and the arrow through the throat, like, that is brilliant. The ending of the movie, especially the kind of like action climax stuff, is incredible, like so good. And it's so rare that movies like this have a good ending. The ending of a movie like on this scale is usually just like a massive long battle with loads of CGI minions and some fucking, you know, electrical storm that's going to swallow the universe because of some like energy orbs or something like that. No, it was brilliant. And also, just because I'm just remembering it right now, the Hydra was amazing. There's certain special effects moments in this where, like, without getting into the quality of the CGI, which is decent enough in most of the movie, it's the staging of it, the way that it's revealed or framed or occurs is so well thought out. It's so well storyboarded. It's so scary and exciting. So I think there's just, you know, the movie pops at certain moments to a massive extent. But yeah, that final bit, which is like very modern, so the Odyssey journey like is very like old school, like that's kind of as I imagined the book to be. Once we get back to Ithaca, it's Game of Thrones. It's a incredibly familiar style of storytelling that we see all the time in samurai movies or whatever it might be, and I found that to be excellent. The drum stuff, like the score in general, I was like, it's probably one of the worst scores in a Nolan movie, but that's just that just speaks to how good the scores have been in Chris Nolan movies. And as I said, once we lose Hans Zimmer, that you know, quality nosedives. But all of the times when it was an exciting action scene and the score was like just drums basically, that was really, really effective. In terms of loud movies, it does loudness really well, which I haven't always felt about Chris Nolan. I liked the end where they get to ride off into the sunset together. But like those kind of callbacks where it's like, we'll sow a seed of something and then we'll give you more of that later. will sow a seed of Elliot Page as a kid and Robert Pattinson as a kid, and what their dynamic is and how their little story plays out, and will pay off on that right at the very end. We'll sow the seed of the strumming the bow, we'll pay off it later. Like, it's just a lot of good work done on a script level, which has been my main complaint about him over the years, probably. I've also complained about how long his movies are. I guess it's like, if you're enjoying a movie, it doesn't feel as long. I miraculously didn't need the toilet the entire way through this movie for some reason, so I got to see every second of it, and I don't really feel it needs to be much shorter than it is. Like, there's always room for a bit of trimming here and there, but it's a very, very rare movie that I'm not bothered by it being 3 hours long. So yeah, hats off to him there as well. Probably have some other stray observations that will come up. I'll just say this one. I like we've got the main plot, but then there's other stories that more literary people like my wife would probably know inside out, but I don't know. Like the story of the king's wife and him sacrificing his daughter for good wins, and him coming back home, and we get a lot of cool stories sort of relayed to us briefly, and they're not the main focus of the action, but they add to the feeling that this world, and this is what I loved about Game of Thrones as well, it's it feels like there's a lot going on in the world. So yeah, anyway, I've talked for an enormous amount of time now, so I will sort of tie it all together to say I enjoyed this movie. I suspect that when I find out how much everyone else loved it, then I'm going to feel like I didn't like it by comparison, because I don't think it's the best thing since sliced bread. I don't think it's one of the best movies ever made, which Nolan movies are generally described as, and I highly doubt it's going to be one of the best films of this year. But as a trip to the cinema, I had a real good time with it. And I think that the what you get when you take a trip to the cinema and you watch a big blockbuster movie is usually complete dog shit. So it's nice when you see something that's good, because it really it really reminds you, oh, you can make good big movies that are good. You can do that. It's possible to do that. There doesn't seem to be a market demand for it, but you can do it. And last night, almost went without mentioning, but last night I watched Gladiator 2. Similar length, obviously completely different era, but it's still both sort of sword and sandal type movies with that kind of mythical hero's journey type thing, a fair bit in common between the movies. For starters, Gladiator 2 is shot digitally and looks like a YouTube video, whereas the Odyssey looks absolutely stunning by comparison. It was really done favors by my having just recently watched Gladiator 2, which looks unbelievably bad. But secondly, it's just overall a much better movie with much more gravity. And I think sort of 20 minutes into the movie, I was like, I'm so much more invested in what's going on in this film than I was for anything in Gladiator 2. He is a incredibly talented director, and I've maintained that opinion the whole way through him making movies that I ultimately didn't like, because all of those movies have ample reason to acknowledge his talents and compliment him. So seeing that in a movie that I do like, it's just, he knows how to set the stakes, and he knows how to elevate the atmosphere within a scene with just the whole framing of everything. Sometimes he's a bit overly serious. This movie has barely any humor in it, but yeah, I liked it. Anyway, let's see what you thought. Just back home here now, settled down finally after a long hard day. Just thinking more about the movie, kind of running through the different characters and stuff. Something occurred to me that a scene that I think I misinterpreted. So Zendaya plays this Athena vision that he's seeing throughout the movie. And the scene where we see the real Zendaya have her head chopped off, or the camera cuts away, I interpreted that as they were taking the princess out of the palace, and he saw that happening, and that's why when he sort of has visions of Athena, he sees her represented as that, as the way Zendaya looks. But now, thinking about it, because I did think it was quite cheesy the way there's the cutting off the statue's head and the cutting off her head at the same time, but it's like, no, they're just desecrating the temple of Athena, and they're just cutting off the statue's head, but that's stirring to him, and that then becomes the sort of trauma that he carries forth from that point on. I was thinking about this, like the other day I listened to a podcast, and I think you listened to it too, about that old piece of film criticism where they say that you can't make an anti-war movie. Like, there's no way to make an anti-war movie because war is just too seductive and glamorous on screen. It's too exciting. People enjoy it. If you watch Saving Private Ryan, you enjoy watching the war, so therefore it's not fully anti-war. And you obviously get an enormous amount of people, some of which I know personally, who just eat that stuff up and just can't get enough of constantly watching war-based content. And they, like, their ultimate fantasy is that they got to be in like a room with a big map over a table, drawing out lines and stuff like that. So this is an interesting one. It is a war movie in the sense that I don't think a war movie needs to feature combat. This one does feature combat, but a war movie to me can be set entirely away from the actual battles and just be like life during wartime. But this one kind of is about the aftermath of a war. It's about soldiers, warriors, and we often see them fighting, but the story by and large takes place after the war is over. And it's one of the, sometimes in the movie I felt like there wasn't enough going on in terms of like themes and any sort of depth, but other times I felt that was there. And one of the strands they bring in later in the movie is the sort of post-traumatic stress, the post-war syndrome, the what have we done, and how does a man live with that, especially someone who has reverence for the gods and stuff like that. And I was thinking, this is interesting because you don't see, like, this will go into that canon now of movies that could be considered an anti-war movie. Now, I'm not saying it's like a great shining example of that, but it is interesting that you kind of got this whole, so much of the movie is him and Zendaya, and him, I guess, living with this sin of what he was involved in. It's interesting because I watched Gladiator 2 last night, and that sort of discusses the cost of war a lot as well. But it's not a good movie. I mean, they both kind of do it about equally, because Gladiator 2 emphasizes it more, whereas this movie emphasizes it less, but it's a better movie. And also the Zendaya character, I thought several times in the movie, I'm like, I'm watching another movie where Zendaya is like this kind of accessory character to the protagonist in the desert, looking kind of brutally at him, like disapprovingly at him. It's different to Dune in that she's a figment of his imagination here, whereas in Dune she's actual real character, so she has a bit more agency. But in it's by and large in the Dune movies, it's almost this same sort of thing, which is just a weird quirk. I guess also just because I associate Nolan and Villeneuve together, and I think of like the Dune movies as being almost an extension of the Nolan verse, because they're like, the whole same filmmaking ethos when it comes to like the casting and the music and the way it looks and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I don't know, just a few stray tidbits. I think there'll probably be a few days before you see the movie, or I think actually, did you say you're going to see it Sunday? In any case, some other stuff might come to my mind before you get a chance to drop a voice note. Day 2 of having seen the Odyssey now, just being kind of like having a lazy morning. I've left the house now to meet a friend, run a few errands. I'm like just like thinking about that movie more. And one thing that's occurred to me, this is just like the most no-brainer thing that like is just so patently obvious, but Chris Nolan movies really are a lot, right? It's not just length, it's like so many characters, so many moments, so many elements. And as I said, I didn't find this one chaotic. I found it to be like nicely paced and easy to watch. So I don't mean this in like a derogatory sense, but this morning I was like looking at the cinema listings and I was like, seeing what was on. Not many movies I'm interested in right now, and every cinema you look up is predominantly filled with showings of the Odyssey. I was like, would I go see the Odyssey again? People went to see Oppenheimer like 7 times and stuff. I think there's been a few Nolan movies I have seen multiple times in the cinema, but so would I go see it again? And my first thought was like, I didn't enjoy it enough to go see it again, to do 3 more hours of the Odyssey. But then I realized that the thing that was even giving me pause to flirt with the idea was like, there's so much to digest, and it's not like scratching your head in puzzlement, like it's not hard to understand, but there's just so much in that movie, so much content in it or whatever, that I wouldn't mind seeing it again to just kind of like, I don't know, have a bit of a lower, a gentler watch it or something. I don't know, like just watch it as a more stripped back movie without being like, okay, now this is happening, okay, now we're doing this. I don't know, hard thing to explain, but there's something about his movies, which is I'm usually not even liking this because I'm not on board with the movie, and then I'm getting a lot of movie, too much movie. But yeah, I did. Perhaps if I go to see another movie in the next week or two, maybe if I've got a whole bunch of time on my hands, I might pop in to watch the Odyssey again. Probably not, but yeah, there's a lot to digest. Oh yeah, one more. I mean, you're going to get little dribs and drabs of stray observations now that pop into my head, but one interesting thing they did in the movie, kind of from like a production design perspective, was do you remember, well, of course you remember the character Agamemnon, who I believe was played by Benny Safdie. I was waiting to see his face. I was like, who's it going to be? Who's it going to be? And you only see him kind of for a split second. I was like, is that Benny Safdie? But the way he looks is like WWE level, like fucking crazy looking bad guy or whatever. And he's like massive and he's wearing this crazy helmet. And it's very much like, oh man, when this guy, like when like Matt Damon has to fight him, or when he's like doing hero shit or whatever, it's going to be so fucking epic. And what they did, which was kind of an interesting decision, was he only ever does soft stuff, like hugging people, bowing to people, like really gracefully kind of interacting with people. I thought that was like that must have been a conscientious, but like it worked really well because it kept the tension of the character, but also didn't turn him into like a Marvel villain or something. So yeah, another nice little thing about the movie.
Hey man, just going for a walk in the park now on my lunch break. Went to see the Odyssey yesterday. It's funny, the absolute cheek of you to have a go at Nolan for the length of his movies and wait 20 minutes of a voice note before even getting into any thought whatsoever about the Odyssey, and by extension the cheek of me to complain about the length of movies in general, who's pretty much known for the exact same thing. So for all intents and purposes, we are the Christopher Nolan of podcasting. In fact, I might send these voice notes out of linear order in honor of how much we're like Christopher Nolan of podcasting. In fact, we're like Christopher Nolan of podcasting so much that like sometimes we'll come back with voice notes weeks after identifying a part of a movie in no particular order that we want to talk about. So rest assured, if anybody ever listened to this and heard either of us talk about 3-hour runtimes of movies before getting into a thought about a movie until similar runtimes in the voice note podcasting sphere, the irony will not be lost, my friend. I also like the way you talk about, well, I'm not saying this is the best thing since sliced bread. And of course, sliced bread famously, or the Odyssey famously predating sliced bread by thousands of years. But yeah, I'll reply to a few things you've said in your build-up and just respond to them. Yeah, for me, Nolan hasn't made a movie that stays with me since Interstellar. I think if I go to the list of some of his movies, Tenet I didn't like at all, Dunkirk I thought was decent, Oppenheimer I thought was decent, but when I say decent, I mean it won't stay with me. While I was in the cinema, I might have enjoyed it to various degrees, but beyond that, it doesn't have any staying power. Is the Odyssey similar? Well, I've only seen it yesterday, so we'll see in terms of its staying power. I would say it is probably the most I've enjoyed the Nolan movie since Interstellar for sure. And just talking about the discourse, the other thing that you brought up, like I miss the times when a discourse around the film was that of excitement, that of anticipation. I know comic book fandom, and maybe, I don't know, Star Wars is often cited, that type of fandom for a long time has had this type of toxic reaction to movie news in relation to the production of movies, where, oh, you can't cast Michael Keaton. It goes back as far as I know, just from listening to Kevin Smith talking about Batman or movies like that. But I think that type of negativity surrounding a movie has seeped into, like many things, when the mainstream of something, it's now become mainstream and talking about anything. So the discourse about this movie, and again, like you said, this is maybe the one director as of now that has a type of pull that is something like, oh, a new Scorsese movie maybe in the 90s, or a new Spielberg movie maybe is probably the other one more accurate, where it will get everybody talking. And I think with the Odyssey, boy, did it get everybody talking. And luckily, I've even avoided a trailer going into this movie, and I wasn't that familiar with the story or what happened in relation to is it Homer's works. So I managed to avoid a lot. But what I couldn't avoid is just this really bad discourse about casting and Elliot Page being cast, and what's her name, the actress who played Helen of Troy. Just this terrible discourse before even seeing the movie. As I say, and as Nolan said, the discourse is irrelevant because you haven't seen the movie yet. And having seen the movie, even that toxic crap before the movie even happened, it's just has no relevance to the movie itself. And again, I'm only bringing it up because you brought the discourse in general up regarding this movie, and you mentioned that this modern, what was it, adaptation, reinterpretation of it, of this woman who adapted it and used modern language. And her argument, which you thought was brilliant, was that people wouldn't have talked like that anyway. And I believe that annoying Channel 4 interviewer who's always trying to get you, like get Quentin Tarantino, get Robert Downey Jr. It's almost like he's embarrassed to be talking about the promotion of a movie, so he tries to inject something that isn't really relevant into it. I heard him talking about that to Tom Holland, and Tom Holland said, yeah, but I'd be also speaking Greek, so it's irrelevant that I'd be saying mom and dad. Now, I don't think it actually is as irrelevant as you or Tom has made it out to be, because although the ancient English that's often used in these movies isn't accurate in the slightest, I do believe it does something with our brain to cue in that, all right, this is ancient, this is in the past, this is not very close to now. So I think by very extension of that, when you are using contemporary language and contemporary, not exactly slang, but the movie does open with Travis Scott, who, despite absolutely wrecking WrestleMania for me with his stupid messing up the main event, but anyway, I digress, he's a contemporary poet. There's contemporary language in this. So I think even though it isn't accurate based on the 100-year-old language, there is a choice. There is a choice to use contemporary language that does have an effect. And now I don't even see it as a criticism in terms of on historically accurate grounds. Of course not. That is watertight in terms of, yeah, well, they wouldn't be speaking Old English either. So I get that. But in terms of the grounds of decision making and making it relevant to now and language of choice, I do think it is a relevant thing to not exactly question, but analyze. And yeah, I think it is something that certainly jarred me, despite actually getting a heads up based on that interview. Now, in terms of the movie itself, I enjoyed it. I got swept up in it. Thought it was a good blockbuster fare. And yeah, I think, like you said, if I'm comparing this to how much everyone else will love it, I think my estimation of how good it is will be less. But at the same time, just the discourse in isolation with you, and just as a film fan in isolation, yeah, thought it was good. I think the movie opens with a few different things that framed my understanding and my interpretation of this movie. And the first thing is, it starts with the text, and I'm not going to get this exactly right, but you'll understand my sentiments. And that is, this was a time of apparent magic. Now, I thought that was very interesting text to choose, and I listened to Dan Carlin's history podcast, and I know you've listened to it from time to time. In fact, I think you've put me onto it, And he talked about how people believing magic to exist in ancient times, therefore, from a perspective point of view and an analytic point of view, you could say that magic did exist in terms of how their psychology was. And yeah, I think the framing of that phrase, a land of apparent magic, really pointed me down specific avenues with this, because apparent is an almost skeptical view. If you say, you know, apparently he was there at 8, or yeah, apparently you can do this, apparently if you scan this coupon you'll get a discount. So it is a type of questioning approach. So then you wonder, is what we're led to believe, that what they're seeing is only what they're believing based on the times that they're in, and the psychology of the world full of gods and what they might see? Is that what we're meant to believe that they're seeing? And yeah, I thought that was an interesting mission statement, if you want to call it that. Now, again, I think this movie leaves it open for many different interpretations of this stance, but I think a shot soon after that, now I'm not sure, I can't remember exactly the timeline of this, ironically, for Nolan's work, but we get a shot of the horse of Troy on a beach, just with this epic cinematic view. And this is a very cinematic film. It's one of these reasons why cinema exists. And we get the horse of Troy on the beach, slightly buried, washed up next to the shoreline. And what does that evoke to you? Well, I'll tell you what it evoked to me. Planet of the Apes, that great shot of the Statue of Liberty, and that a massive symbol of the United States, a massive symbol of just epic proportion. So I think the framing of the horse of Troy in that way, now whether intentional or not, it does evoke that something seismic either has already happened or is about to happen, that has ended civilization in a way. And of course, as the movie goes on, we do realize that this event has ended civilization in some way. The fact that these people are in the horse, and it is in direct conflict to Zeus's law, and it's the ultimate almost FU to Zeus's law, because it's handed as a type of offering of peace. And of course, the ultimate thing is, when a stranger is in your house, you would treat them well, because as far as I know, I'm watching I think it's the Children of Zeus or the Son of Zeus at the minute, this animated series, that you never know what form the gods have taken. So this has almost, again, imprinted the psychology of the time, where yeah, you just wouldn't do that shit, to put it in contemporary terms. And so already by that symbol, that's the type of Statue of Liberty washed up on the shore, Planet of the Apes, that they're bringing down a nuclear bomb in epic proportions of the time, ironically, for someone who's done Oppenheimer recently. And yeah, I think, like you, I do think Nolan has done a good job of messing around time a bit, and in the way to tell the story, and in a non-linear way, and get us exposition that doesn't seem like exposition. It's exposition that sounds like action, or that looks like action. So when we are hearing Tom Holland talk about things, and we're seeing, like you said, very Game of Thrones with the suitors in the house, and we're getting a lot of the details of that. I think in some films that can feel like, all right, we're just saying what happens, but because of the different visual cuts, because of the intercutting between different events, we're getting a lot of bang for a buck in scenes that maybe on the script would have been very much jumping out of the page of, well, we're just telling, we're filling you in. And I always thought this was a poem. Well, first of all, I didn't realize this was the poem that I was somewhat familiar with, but yeah, apparently it's 24 books worth of a poem. So I'm sure there's a lot of stuff in this adaptation that has been taken literally from it, and there's a lot of it that's Nolan's. And I think the things that is Nolan's is something he's always been interested in. And I think this movie reminded me quite a lot of Batman and quite a lot of his other movies in a way, because we have the opening moments of Travis Scott. What's he doing? He's telling the story of Troy. He's telling the deeds of Odyssey. Is that his name? Odyssey? Or Odyssey or something. He's telling the tale. And then that is intercut with different footage. And what do we see later on when Tom Holland goes to see, what's his name? John Burtnell. Let me tell you something, Telemachus. Let me tell you something, brother. Let me tell you something, Telemachus. Let me tell Telemachus something. What does he get when he goes to see John Burtnell? He gets a much more really realistic, almost like a revisionist take of contemporary stories that are happening in their lifetime, which I thought was interesting, because on the one hand we got these great deeds, we've got these great exploits in a very mythological kind of way. Obviously we talked about Unforgiven there the other day, in the Western sense, where Clint Eastwood is almost pulling back the curtain on the mythos of the West and the legend. I think this does this in real time in terms of the running time of this movie, but through different passages of time and showing of events or hearing of events in an oratory way. But in this movie, because even in our society today, the myth of the Trojan horse, it sounds cool, right? As Dan Carlin often says, the emotion of the people around to tell the tale are gone, and deaths are just a statistic, and events is almost like something of pop culture. It's almost like talking about England versus Argentina or something, the way you're like, oh, and then this happened. So when you talk about the horse of Troy now, you think, yeah, and then can you believe the audacity that they went in there and they opened it? There's a sense of coolness to it, because we're detached from the emotion of it. And I think Matt Damon's character is very much detached from the emotion of the events he has been a part of as he wanders around in that place with Charlize Theron. So yeah, I really like that we got the Burtnell version of what actually happened, and it's dark, it's disgusting. They're stuck in the horse, it's all sweaty, people are vomiting, people are getting stabbed, but they're getting choked so they don't say anything. And then the Elliot Page character is just left to the wolves, not knowing what's happening, because they have to have her believe, or have him believe, that the horse is empty. So, and then when they're let into the city, then we get to see that version of events from the actual revisionist point of view, instead of the myths that people are spinning about these people in real time in this movie. And yeah, when we see them unleash the fury, as he calls it, within this grounds, then it's just horrible. They're pillaging, they're murdering, probably raping as well. There's probably horrible stuff going on, and that's all missing from the myth, the fun story and the cool story of the Horse of Troy. So I like we get different perspectives and different tellings of what happened. And then of course we have the myth of Helen of Troy, with the face that launched 1,000 ships. Of course, that was propaganda within itself, right? That was a myth within itself. And then we get to see how the reality once again hits the mythology that's been woven. Bam, her face is cut. She looks disheveled. She's obviously bitter. And we get to see, right, yeah, we all love these tales of the face that launched 1,000 ships or however many ships, but this movie constantly gives us consequence of these events in a revisionist way, while also showing us the myth at the same time. It's really good like that. And yeah, I think is as well, what was I going to say? Yeah, which brings me on to my other point, that so you mentioned that you were less interested by the Lord of the Rings type of elements of this movie. Well, for me, I felt it was King Kong Skull Island shit was how I interpreted it, actually, because yeah, it was just almost these episodic events. And of course I know the Lord of the Rings is episodic as well, where they're going from place to place, but I think Lord of the Rings weaves the narrative a little bit better than this, in terms of it doesn't just feel like shit happening in Lord of the Rings. But I think maybe that might be a based on the literature of the past problem, rather than, I wouldn't really criticize Nolan for that. But yeah, so then it got me thinking again. This is back to the apparent magic perspective of this, and how people are attributing stuff to gods. They're attributing horrible things and almost telling them into fun, invigorating bedtime stories, essentially, in order to rouse the troops, I guess. Oh yeah, that was the other thing. You mentioned that, we both listened to that podcast by Michael Phillips and Michael Shannon the other day, is that statement that is every war movie a pro-war movie, even if it's anti-war, like Paths to Glory. And I think, I don't know if you remember or you just forgot, but there was actually a definitive piece of analysis in that podcast that swayed me. And it wasn't so much that it glorifies it, it wasn't so much that it shows cool shit happening during war. The ultimate point that swayed me was that you're following a protagonist, and the protagonist is on one side of the war, and you're going to want that protagonist to succeed. So on the ultimate point was that it's pro-war because you're rooting for one side of the war to win over the other, because that protagonist is on your side. I mean, I guess the argument to that is that maybe there's a war movie, I don't know if you've ever done it, but two people on opposite sides would alleviate that problem. But it was a very good point by either Michael Phillips or Michael Shannon. And yeah, it did make me wonder. That was the one statement that made me think more than anything of, yeah, maybe every war movie is a little bit anti-war or a little bit pro-war in the way that we have to follow the hero's journey, right? Yeah, but anyway, this movie, when he's on his journey full of cyclopses and witches, this is when I remembered, oh right, I know this work. I've kind of seen little adaptations, the little stories about this part of the journey. Because before this, I felt like I didn't really know, even if Matt Damon's character would have been alive when Tom Holland was looking for him. So yeah, but then it got me wondering again, back to this time of apparent magic. So it made me wonder, am I, and again, I think this movie simultaneously has its cake and eats it while also allowing for both interpretations. But because of the apparent magic, this set me down on me thinking of, is Odyssey's journey, when after he sacks and pillages Troy, is that meant to be literal? Or is this a guy dealing with PTSD and it's the manifestation of everything he's been through coming out like this? Because we see him with Charlize Theron on a beach having washed up on shore. Now I think the movie leaves it open to interpretation in a very fulfilling way from my perspective, which is why I found there was a lot more interest to this, is the bits where he's seeing the Cyclops, seeing the witch, and especially when he's seeing the dead, all the soldiers sacrificed. Is that PTSD fever dreams when he's washed up on shore, being drugged, essentially? He's on drugs, he's on hallucinogenics, she's feeding him those mad flowers. Is he just getting therapy for PTSD? Now, again, sometimes I think that's the easiest way to analyze something, where it's like, yeah, well, you know, was it real? I think that's an easy thing to throw out. But in this, I think there is more than enough there to have that reading. Like I said, I think they can be concurrently. I think, like, if you say, nah, it wasn't there, like that's, I think in this case, I think, yeah, like if you come back with a case, I think neither of us, which is often the case with analysis in general, but I think neither of us would be any closer to the truth, if you want to call it that, the truth of the movie, which I hate. But anyway, I'm just telling you my thoughts. So yeah, I feel like he is there with Charlize Theron. They have washed up on shore after doing some raiding, and a lot of the stuff that we're seeing on his voyage is how somebody with PTSD and believes in the gods would interpret what they're seeing and would consider real to an extent. So when he sees those giant soldiers, that would almost be specific to how you would see things from battles that you already had. They would be undefeated, you'd be running from them, they'd be monstrous. And then seeing all the dead bodies of the people who you sacrificed in that battle. Whether this is an anti-war movie or not, Matt Damon's character is almost coming to terms with what he's done, and coming to terms with the fact that that he shouldn't have been doing what he's doing, and there was a cost to it. And again, we see Athena appear to him, and she's looking at him again. This is another, as you said, sad Zendaya performance, where she's frowning. But then when we get to the temple, we realize this, the priestess that he kills. So again, these are delusions of a sick man, and of how a sick man would interpret the time that he's in. Again, we have, even taking the Bible, for instance, when Jesus was in the desert without food and water for 40 days. Well, of course he would think he was being visited by God. And of course he would interpret the things that he saw when you don't have the modern language, which is why it's interesting that Nolan did use contemporary language, because when we're dealing with ancient interpretations and we use in contemporary language, I think it adds more to this point that, yeah, we're not really meant to be with you with what you're seeing. And then again, of course, when we get to the siren songs, he's the one that chooses to listen to the song. And what does he hear? He hears regret. He hears things he shouldn't have done. And we have all this superstition with his men talking about how he's responsible for angering the gods. It's a very superstitious time. And I think as well, this movie reminds me a lot of Interstellar as well, which I know is your favorite movie, as I say sarcastically. With Interstellar, what does Matthew McConaughey do? He leaves his, well, does he have a wife? No, he doesn't. He leaves his kids and spends the whole time regretting. He leaves his kids, in fact, to save the world, or on the promise of saving the world. And what does he want to do? Spend the whole movie getting back, realizing that he's made a mistake. And what does Matt Damon's character do in this? He leaves his wife, he leaves his son, and he spends the whole movie, instead of going across planets, he goes across different islands. He's basically in a spaceship that's a sail ship, trying to find a way back after realizing that maybe trying to save the world wasn't worth him missing out on his marriage, and wasn't worth him losing years. And again, like in Interstellar, when we get to that planet where time speeds up and minutes or years, Odyssey doesn't even know how long he's been gone, right? He asks Charlie Thorne, how long have you been gone? She says 7 years. He's like, 7 years. So again, Nolan is obsessed with this motif of lost time, pursuing greatness, pursuing your legacy, and then realizing that maybe that isn't enough. So yeah, I really liked all that element, and I found a lot to chew on personally in those scenes. Now, yeah, then at a certain point we get the most Batman-like movie from Nolan in a while, as Bruce Wayne comes back from his training in the with what were they called, the Legion of Darkness with Ra'ul Ghul, is that his name? And he slips back into town. No one recognizes him. He's got his hood up. And not just that, we often talk about we don't often talk about Robin Hood, but we have talked about Robin Hood in the past, and we talk about the problems with that text where he decides to enter the bow competition, and it's just such a terrible setup. Well, I could imagine that this setup with the bow, it's almost works out similar as that Robin Hood scene, except they're not expecting Robin Hood to show up. That's the big difference. But at the same time, you could have just imagined this being told in such a pedestrian way where it does feel like it's inevitable that he shows up. But in this, like you said, it's such a stirring moment when he stirs his bow and he takes that shot. That's an absolute brilliant scene, and it just goes to show you what you can't. I presume that's written in the poem. Maybe it isn't. Maybe it's constructed differently, but you could just imagine it being very pedestrian in the hands of a different director. And yeah, it's stirring. And before that, we basically get the hooded Bruce Wayne come back into Gotham, and Gotham's corrupt. He needs to clean up Gotham City. And when there's a scene where Tom Holland goes, what are you gonna bring revenge? He's going, I'm gonna bring all of it. Like he's even got a little bit of a gravelly voice at that point. So brilliant stuff. Sorry, I just had to pause that for a second and send another one, because that was a lot of time to be lost if it didn't send. So yeah, we get him back into Gotham, and yeah, just concentrate on the Game of Thrones side. I think The acting was a little bit hammy. I think Tom Holland didn't particularly enjoy. There was people who knew what they were doing with the type of hamminess, and I think Robert Pattinson, like you correctly identified, he knows the type of movies that he's in. He's got that beady eye. He's very weaselly, and when people just really nail a type of campness, but I'm not talking about Batman 1966 or whatever campness, but just the type of campness that inevitably comes with this genre. I think it works very good with the self-seriousness of Nolan. And yeah, Robert Pattinson does good. I think, what's her name, Anne Hathaway was a little bit too shouty, but she's fine. This is the genre, and I think some of the lines of dialogue was pretty weak. And I think, oddly enough, some of the effects and staging in that final scene where we get Matt Damon, as you said, in full John Wick mode, I think there was one or two slight little effects there that didn't really like, where one guy gets knocked back, and then when Matt Damon picks up the hammer and spins it around. Thought that was very labored. You could see the stand here at this mark type cue stuff going on. I almost liken it to WWE and wrestling, where you can almost see the craft a little bit too well, where people are helping each other do certain things. And I think in this situation, there was just one or two scenes where you could really see that type of stand here type stuff. Now, even without seeing that, I think this, again, another movie you don't like, The Dark Knight Rises, I think this is the Dark Knight Rises thing, and I say that as a massive fan of the movie, where you're getting so caught up in that moment, you're not really noticing those things. And if you are noticing those things, it's such a great type of the pumping, exhilarating, frantic emotion that you're just caught up in it. It doesn't matter. Your brain doesn't even have time to process that for you, because the overriding feeling you're feeling is adrenaline. So when he's taking out those people with those arrows, is it Logan Paul Marshall or whatever he's called? He runs upstairs. Tom Holland follows him. He locked the door. John Linguini, when he's running up, there's so much stuff happening. Then he's punching a fucking hole in the roof and throwing down the weapon. There's just so much great stuff going on that you're just caught up in the moment, and that's what good cinema is. That's what I like to see from Nolan. That's when Nolan is at his best. So even though there was a few little things, just a few little things in those scenes, it didn't matter a bit, because it's really enjoyable, it's really good fun, and it's just like, this is another Batman movie to an extent at that point. And yeah, it's good stuff. I didn't expect what I got from this movie in terms of nice set pieces. There's great set pieces, and there's mostly great uses of effects. That scene with Samantha Morton, when she's almost molding them like clay into pigs, that just looks so good. The Cyclops looks good with the hands. Very Guillermo del Toro in the daylight at times, I thought, actually. And yeah, you even mentioned, I think, that you might have thought Doug Jones was the Cyclops. It is that type of thing, isn't it? So really liked all that, and yeah, it's a good movie. And the other thing is, as well, going back to the myth and the stories, we actually get a little bit of Dark Knight Rises with the ending as well. These again, back to these things that Nolan is interested in. At the end of Dark Knight Rises, we have the exact same callback done in a similar way, whereas obviously in Dark Knight Rises, Alfred says, Master Wayne, I one day, Master Wayne, I hope to see you in a cafe, Master Wayne. And you kind of, again, actually, literally with Anne Hathaway, actually, now that I think about it, he's like, I hope to see you a Catwoman, Master Wayne. And then at the end, we see Batman dropping a nuclear bomb into the sun, or not into the sun, into the sunset, and then does he die? But then we have Alfred on holidays. We have Alfred off the wine. We have him on holidays, and then he sees Christian Bale with Anne Hathaway. He was such a lovely couple. And then you're thinking, well, is that just what he's imagining, or did he die? Is that the myth? And again, Batman was all about the give them something to fear. Give them something to fear. Got him. So there is that type of Batman making his own mythology as well. And in this, what do we have Matt Damon saying? He says early on, do you know what? Should we just go on a ship and just sail away and forget all this stuff? Should we just do that? Or maybe it was Anne Hathaway said this. And then at the end, in the scene at the end where Matt Damon is in her arms and he looks in pretty bad shape. Now, he doesn't really look like he's dying, but is he dying in her arms? And then she's doing the whole Alfred thing of let's go away, let's sail into the sea type of thing. Again, Anne Hathaway. And is that thing at the end where he's gone off in the ship, again with Anne Hathaway, is he being told myths about where they're going to calm his dying self or not? So regardless of what you believe, and for the record, I kind of believe in both The Dark Knight Rises and this, I think we're meant to believe that he does sail into the sun. So I'm not saying that it's not, but it just follows the exact same type of callback. Someone seems to be dying, and then we get a flash at the same time of that where we're getting the happy ending. So yeah, he's still using these bag of tricks. He's still saying the same things, doing the same things, but in these instances, this is where I want him to be using these bag of tricks and saying these things. So yeah, I'd rather these type of movies from Nolan.
Hey man, just on my lunch break here, walking back from the supermarket. Amazing analysis of the movie there. Definitely deepens my consideration of the film in a big way. And I love the way you sort of threaded it in with his entire filmography. I think, yeah, lots of really interesting and valid points. You early in the voice note talked about how the big unifying thing of post-Interstellar and Nolan for you, whether you've thought some films were decent or some were bad or whatever, has been that none of them have stayed with you. And you wonder, you know, obviously time will tell. Still, we can't really, it's at least difficult to anticipate how much this one will stay with us. I know you use that metric quite a lot, or at least you make that observation quite a lot about movies. I notice it because it's not one that I'm inclined to make, where you say that like such and such film hasn't stayed with you. It's interesting, like I don't really think about that. It doesn't mean that I don't appreciate it subconsciously. I mean, there are certainly films like The Holdovers, for example, or Your Sister's Sister, where I know that their presence in my life, their ongoing presence in my life years after watching them, is something that I value and something that I'm like still getting a lot from. So I definitely think I enjoy films staying with me, but I don't really think about it that much. It's not like top of mind. And I suppose like on a conscious level, my interaction with the film is like much more about the immediate. It's also just like I don't never really think about the past in a general sense. So I'm just kind of my intuitive kind of conscious interaction with the world is all very much about like what I'm experiencing at a given moment. But because you said that, because you brought that up, and it gave me pause to think back on his filmography and see if I felt the same way. And I would say that broadly speaking, I do. Memento is definitely a film that has stayed with me. The Dark Knight has stayed with me. And it's almost like a bit of a no-brainer that like a bunch of films that I don't particularly like aren't going to stay with me. It's like the fact that they didn't stay with me is just the least embarrassed away. But this one is a film that I did enjoy and I did like, and now I kind of again, it wouldn't have naturally occurred to me, but now I'm sort of thinking about the Odyssey. I'm thinking about, will it stay with me? Do I care if it stays with me? And it's only been, you know, 4 or 5 days since I saw it, but it's starting to feel a bit less likely that it would stay with me. Now, actually, the analysis you've given of the film makes it have a lot more depth than I felt as I was watching it. And so maybe if I consider that depth a bit more and maybe re-watch it through that lens, maybe then there'll be a little bit more just heft to the film and it might stay with me. I'm just looking at some stuff outside on a wall. No, I don't think I want any of that. But yeah, like the experience of watching it was like, this is a big sort of sensory overload, not in a bad way. But then I'm kind of done with it and it's not really my movie. Remember when I saw The Dark Knight or Inception, I was so excited for the like following days that movie exists. Same with when I saw The Matrix, and there's like, you know, countless examples that are outside of Nolan's filmography where like you watch the film, you have an amazing time, and then you're just buzzing for days afterwards because you're like, this movie, man, oh, remember that? And like, it's kind of like, it's opened your mind to possibilities of what can be done in cinema. It's getting you really excited and all that. Haven't felt an ounce of that with the Odyssey. So yeah, it's just difficult. It's interesting kind of when you're weighing up and appraising things, and like, you know, what maybe like in this case where someone else has a thing that they consciously observe about films that you don't, and then you're like, well, do I feel that way about it? Do I feel this way about it? Anyway, as I said, I enjoyed the film. Just to touch on some of the points that you've raised there in your voice notes. So you said that, well, I'll probably butcher it, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you talked about the use of modern English in the film. And I said, so like the argument that you've made, which is that when you use Old English, our brain is doing, it's not immersion breaking because our brain has been like wired to take that as like kind of period accurate or whatever. That's the argument I've been making for the past few months in the lead up to the Odyssey. When I heard that they were doing it in modern English, and then I heard about the defense of that and the argument for that, I have been saying, yeah, but the value in using, let's say, like Victorian English or even earlier English than that is not that it's period accurate. It's that it's a surrogate for period accurate, and our brains click into it and accept it, which they don't do for modern English. But when I saw the film, I feel a bit differently now. I feel that we have, like, the film is brand new, right? It's in the context of these texts that we're dealing with. And obviously, if you go back to Homer, just sort of narrative storytelling, film is like brand new. And we're writing constantly the norms and conventions of what you do. So like, for example, the norm of a film, at least a Hollywood film or like a kind of Western film that's set in ancient Egypt, for example, is that the entire cast is going to be white. They're all going to have English accents, and they're going to speak in, let's say, the English of the 1700s or something like that. So that is like, let's forget about the whole conversation about whether that's problematic or whatever. Like, just, I'm not even getting into that. I'm just saying that is a norm that was artificially established and became, our brains then accept that as like, yeah, well, of course Cleopatra's going to be white. What else what other ethnicity would she be? Of course she's going to be speaking in an English accent and the way that English was spoken, 200 years ago in England. That's like our brain is doing no work, right? But I don't think that should be like a closed door where you go, this artificial norm that we've now just fully accepted is like the only thing we can do is do that or go for greater authenticity. I think it's perfectly valid, in my opinion, to make new artificial norms. Now, I take your point about like it was a bit of an immersion breaking thing for you, but I watched this whole film, and once or twice when I heard the word mom in the American accent from Spider-Man, I went, that sounds a bit weird. But for 99% of this film's 3-hour runtime, I'm like very seamlessly engaging with it and seamlessly enjoying it. Like if the way that language is spoken in this film was so such a head fuck, then I think I would have struggled through more than like 0.001% of the dialogue in the film. So I think it works well. And like I said, if you accept the approach that we're not going to make things period accurate, then at that point I think it's fair game to choose whatever style of inaccuracy you want. And I think the style that they went with has a lot of really strong benefits to it. So although I was in agreement with you before I watched the film, I actually think it worked pretty well here. And I think it's also exciting because you're watching someone really trying to reckon with this ancient text and go, these are the things I'm interested in as an artist. This is the way I like to express myself. What can I do to kind of honor the original work, but also honor the market and my interests as an artist and all that kind of stuff. Like I like all that coming together. You talked about the iconic shots of the horse on the beach, the Trojan horse, comparing it to Planet of the Apes. Yeah, I think that's a great example of what's peppered throughout this film constantly, which is just like, and peppered throughout his entire filmography and peppered throughout his films that I don't like, is like just really strong images. There's so many incredible shots in this movie, shots of like a ship going through the sea where it's just like incredibly wide, so many massively wide shots, even like, Matt Damon and Zendaya walking along the desert and stuff. And it's like, it's so epic, it's so grand, and it's so like in the hands of a cinematographer and a director who really give a shit about every, like the B-roll, this what would normally be like second AD establishing shots and stuff are just like so well thought out in this film. So yeah, I agree with that. You talked about the Zeus's Law stuff. So I didn't know about Zeus's Law before this movie started. Now you get, I think within the first scene you get a explainer on Zeus's Law, but what you don't get is like a title card coming up on screen that goes, by the way, this entire movie's going to be about Zeus's Law. So it's like slowly becoming kind of hardwired into my brain. And now having seen the whole film and the sort of the final epiphanies of Matt Damon's character about like how he's broken like a really important moral code, and he's like that what they're doing as humans is like a desecration of values that are just really important and make the world a good place, kind of thing. Like I think that's the type of stuff which might make this film better for me on a rewatch. because I thought that was good sort of narrative towards the end of the film, or good themes. But I think it would, watching the whole film through that lens, like I said, is going to probably deepen it for me. And great stuff you've gone over about like how the film deals with the sort of myth versus reality. When you'll get, I think the very first voice we hear is the bard, played by Travis Scott, starting a story, and then just being shut down. So like, and then like you said, when we get John Bernthal, he's kind of debunking certain ways, certain interpretations of the Trojan War and stuff. And it's I didn't think about that stuff as much, and hearing your voice note has like it's made me think higher of the film, because I think Chris Nolan is a contemporary screenwriter dealing with an old text that's very concerned with ancient myths, like ancient storytelling norms, ancient fixations. And he has he for 6 months or however long he's writing this screenplay, he has been reckoning with this and dealing with that kind of back and forth and interplay between like something older and more elevated, i.e. myths, and then just sort of like baseline, more relatable human, like boots on the ground type of storytelling. And the fact that that's just kind of doing a call and response the whole way through the movie, I think is really interesting. It makes it a more formally interesting film, thinking about that stuff. And you've had this. I get that you're not saying this is like objectively the way the film is, but like you've taken it to the extent of like maybe every magical thing we see in this movie is just a fever dream of a man on hallucinogenics, and that's really interesting. I mean, it's, for starters, without sort of deliberately trying to poke holes in it, it feels like a pretty bulletproof theory. I wonder if it's intentional. It definitely didn't occur to me. On the one hand, I like it because it's like, oh, this makes this whole film a kind of accurate, or like a potentially accurate period piece. It gets to have its cake and eats it. It gets to include giants and stuff, but also be a real life thing. It's kind of like A Beautiful Mind or something. But on the other hand, I don't like it. Not that I don't like it for you to have that in your head, but like I don't like it necessarily coming into my film, because you then lose the Lord of the Rings-ness of this film a bit more if it's not a real adventure kind of thing. So, but it works, like, and it's interesting. It's definitely, it leads into, or it works, harmonizes with this whole thing about like, is it or this interplay between reality and myths and stuff like that. So yeah, all very, very interesting stuff. Yeah, I enjoyed the film a lot. I enjoyed hearing your thoughts on it. I'm slightly curious if I have the capacity to enjoy it more, but I wanted to have see it and talk about it with you before I kind of like dive into any of other opinions on it. Now, in my peripheral vision, I have caught glimpses of its reception, and it seems to be being received very well, but I haven't heard anyone else, like I haven't read any reviews or anything like that. So I understand that for me, this is like a good movie. Like, it's not the best movie I've seen this week in the cinema, I would say. So it's like that's where it sort of naturally falls for me. Like, I don't really have anything bad to say about it. I do think Spider-Man's acting was pretty bad, but it's not the first time that I've seen him. I think he's really good in Spider-Man, but that's it. But generally, like, I just don't have really much bad to say about it, and I liked it, and it kind of did everything that I want out of going to the cinema and seeing a movie. But now begins the next 10 years of this being in the conversation of the best film ever made or whatever. So I'm sure that that's going to feel a little bit alienating. But anyway, yeah, good flick from Nolan, and wonder what he'll do next.
Hey man, yeah, I suppose I never did ask myself the question is, and I didn't realize I kept on saying it, the movie doesn't stay with me or whether it stays with me. I suppose the reason why that's a mark for me, and that's something that I keep going back to, is because if a movie doesn't stay with you, you can't really live in that world. And maybe it's a memory thing because I'm getting older, and maybe it's the amount of movies I've seen now is so many compared to when I was a kid or teenager. So it could just be a cognitive decline. But you know, if I see a movie and then I get to remember a lot about it, and I get to remember the essence of the movie specifically, or iconic scenes, iconic lines of dialogue, then when I'm thinking about the movie, I can go back there, and I will get more from that movie by virtue of being able to remember it, as opposed to if someone's asking me about a movie. I mean, sometimes we do top fives just in our everyday lives, top 5 movies, and there's some movies that don't get included in that top 5 list because I just don't remember anything about it. I remember loving the movie or liking the movie a lot. Maybe loving is too far, but I remember liking the movie a lot. But then I just don't have enough ability to recall why. So now, does that have anything got to do with the movie from a critical standpoint? No, is probably the answer to that, because when I'm watching the movie, if I got so much out of it, then it's served its purpose. But I guess it's something that I enjoy a little bit extra because it just, you can constantly be happy in your happy place. And just to go back to the language side of things a little bit more, it wasn't immersion breaking in the way maybe I've implied in my voice note. I just mean what it actually did was contemporize it for me in the way, you know, when Baz Luhrmann and Sofia Coppola, they do these period pieces, and Baz Luhrmann will play modern music, and Sofia Coppola, she did Mary Antoinette, and she had quite poppy music from memory. I think the dialogue in this did that in the same way that the music normally does, in the sense that, all right, this feels very current, this feels very pulpy, this feels very of the now. So when he's saying mom and dad and things like that, it wasn't so much that I longed for the old English style. I just mean it totally changed the tone and the context of the movie for me. It made it very feel living rather than some faded old text. So I think that was the benefit for it rather than setting a new template for those type of movies, as I think you suggested. Well, why not they do it this way? But I think for me, watching it right now, just when it came out in the cinema, it just made a dusty old text feel like very, very of the moment, I guess. And I did like that, and especially of the moment when there's been myths made of the moment as well. So it really added to how quickly myths can come about, and different interpretations of very recent events even. So I like that side of it. And I think as well, correct me if I'm wrong, I know I've seen Othello I've seen Othello like the next person, but I feel like that type of old English transition into movies for things like, I don't know, Spartacus and all these old epics, I can't help but feel like that type of old English surely must have transitioned from plays and stage productions where maybe it was the tradition to use that type of language and then use that type of accent, and maybe England had the monopoly in those type of plays and these Shakespearean orators and whatnot, and maybe England sent them out into the world. And I feel like probably when movie making was at a certain time in history, that they wanted to adapt those scripts and those texts, that then it became natural for people to talk in that type of way as well. I don't know. As I said, I'm just a mere Othello watcher like the next person. And just the final thing that occurred to me. Oh, by the way, I forgot to respond to one of your points, which, yeah, that is Benny Safdie for sure. And it's amazing how we could recognize the same without seeing his face. And I actually didn't notice that we don't really get much violence from him. We get him hugging and comforting the people in scenes. I thought, yeah, that was a good observation. Thinking back, it's a nice way to show such a foreboding figure. And it's almost like that Bane thing when he puts the shoulder on, who was it, that it's Australian actor, Ben Mendelsohn, where he's like, you think this gives you power? And he's just puts his hand on him, and we're like, whoa, you kind of still feel the imposingness of this guy's power, even in between hugs and a pat on the back. So yeah, that was a good observation. And finally, the thing I was thinking about as well is Nolan and his obsession with myths and stuff like that, and I guess time to a bigger extent, but just in terms of the myths and stuff like that, I think like him as a filmmaker is a myth maker, right? He is the guy making up these stories about Odyssey. He is the person telling tall tales and putting things like PTSD and turning the screw in these things and telling tales about maybe his own, I don't think he has PTSD, but in terms of his own stories in his normal life. Like I said, a lot of his story is about missing his kids growing up, right? And then what does he do? He makes Interstellar, he makes Odyssey, because he's taking some of his own anguish and turning him into tall tales and turning it into expression. So, and even in Memento, what does Joe Pants start telling Guy Pearce? That he still has a person to get revenge on. So even when he's already got revenge in that movie. So yeah, I think Nolan is really drawn to these type of myths and turning these events and feelings and emotions into stories, because that's what he is, and most filmmakers I guess, unless they're a hack, is that's what they're fundamentally doing as filmmakers anyway. They are the myth makers. So yeah, I can see why he's drawn to these type of subject matter time and time again.
Yeah, I don't know enough about theatre to know if that kind of way that they speak in movies that are set in the ancient world, if that comes from plays. I kind of assumed that was the case, but in any case, I think I enjoyed it. It sounds like you didn't have a problem with it either, actually, like the way that they speak in the Odyssey. And I think it's like, as much as there was a formula that was working, I think this is also a formula that worked. If it worked for you and it worked for me, and people are loving this movie, and you could say the word mom in an American accent is maybe a bridge too far. Maybe it's like not like the entire thing is 100% perfectly balanced. But I feel this way about Game of Thrones. That Game of Thrones is like very understandable. You don't need to be like well read or literary to understand the dialogue in Game of Thrones. And I know Game of Thrones is a fantasy thing, it's not historical, but it's obviously set in a fantasy world that's trying to mimic some of our history to an extent, and the dialogue in Game of Thrones just goes down real easy, and I think the dialogue in the Odyssey goes down real easy. I assume that was the goal, and it is as I said, I found it to be more anachronistic in the casting. Like Matt Damon, I think of it's not his first time playing a historic character, but I think of Matt Damon very much of the now. I think of Spider-Man of the now. I think of Zendaya, all these people like, and so it's, again, it worked for me as the overall package, but it's a different approach, and to be honest, that's a good thing. I think, as I said, you could be like hardline, like pedantic about it and say, unless it's period accurate, the way they speak, the way they look, everything like that, any diversion from period accuracy is a creative failure. You could have that opinion. Obviously, I think we're both the last people on earth to have that opinion, but that's a logically sound opinion to have. But to me, as long as you're deviating, and especially like radically deviating from that, like I would say every ancient Greece movie I've ever seen, every ancient Egypt, ancient Norse, whatever, like any of these kind of like ancient culture movies that I've ever seen, just deviates so dramatically from that at that point I think it's fair game to do whatever you want. And there's a little bit of a like, oh, that's not how I'm used to seeing things go down in this kind of movie, but this movie pulls it off. If this had been a shit movie, I think that stuff like that would have probably irked me. It would have stood out more. I mean, why did they, and they did mess this up, and they messed this up, but it all kind of works. So yeah. Anyway, I don't really have too much more to say about it. And again, maybe that comes back to the depth, although we have spoken at fairly long length about it in true Nolan fashion, as you said. But yeah, it's been a good conversation, and I definitely wouldn't go so far as to say I'm looking forward to my next viewing of this film. In fact, I definitely wouldn't go so far as to say that there will be a next viewing of this film, but I think there's more there to be mined than what I got out of that first viewing. So yeah, I'll let you know if I ever hit it up again, and maybe some new things will come to light.
Hey man, just finished work now. It's a few days since I've seen the Odyssey, and just a few things that I forgot to say, and a few things that have just went around in my head a bit. One thing I didn't say is that I actually really liked Matt Damon's performance, and he's an actor that I often don't like. I think he is a very watered down presence on screen a lot of the time. Like there's just enough sprinkle of leading man to make him seem watchable. Now, I think it's stuff like Good Will Hunting, he has been good, but there's a lot of things where even the Bourne movies or Elysium or movies like that, where even that newest one with Ben Affleck that was for Netflix, just I always find that he's fine, like just fine, but I thought he was pretty good in this. I think it harnessed the to quote the most random Damon movie, the we bought a zoo kind of energy, where he's so pig-headed and foolhardy with something, an idea, or in this a quest, but you meet him when he's in the process of being humbled. And in this, we do see him, other than the flashback part, but anything that happens after Troy, we do see him very humbled and disillusioned and a little bit desperate as well. I like when Matt Damon is desperate. I think he's desperate in The Departed as well, and that's another good performance that does well with his persona. And Yeah, I like that, and I really liked the delivery of when he realizes, and by account we realize, unless we've realized it before that they are the sea people that went and pillaged and plundered after Troy. And yeah, I remember when I'm watching this, I'm thinking, yeah, I wonder what's going to happen when the sea people show up. Well, it's all about, like, and this goes back to the Game of Thrones aspect of things, where I'm thinking, well, they need to get the suitor, they need to get someone back on the throne, because when the sea people show up, and because the movie was 3 hours and the movie flew quite well, I did think there was another maybe 40 minutes left in the movie, just because it didn't feel like 3 hours, and I thought, well, when the sea people show up, it's going to be like the White Walkers. And then, of course, it's revealed to us that, well, the sea people were them, and maybe it was obvious to you and the audience, but it wasn't obvious to me. And at that point, I think, all right, so this world has spawned a different type of myth that's not attributed to people who've actually done the deeds, right? Because we have these Cyclops, we have these great war crimes that are presented as heroic triumphs, and then we have something that is full of disdain, the sea people. You can't be worse than the sea people, and then it's not attributed to the right person that it's attributed to, which is interesting as well, how sometimes acts that you have done get attributed to other people, and it's almost a wariness in the air that this foreboding force exists, but actually it was manifested by the actual acts of people, and just packaged into a story not even attributed to the people who've enacted the horrors. So I thought that was really good too. And the other thing as well, I was just rocking around in my head a bit more as well, where I thought of the end of The Dark Knight Rises and the end of this, where it's almost you get, I wouldn't go as far as to say that he's trying to say that you can choose either or, because I felt it was heavy that the final scenes in Batman The Dark Knight Rises and this is that, oh yeah, they did go away, but just the contrast between two possibilities has gone around in my head a little bit more. And I just realized that in one of those scenarios, someone basically dies because they've totally given themselves to their work or their mission. They've become consumed by it. And I think that also happens in a few of these other movies as well, but I just don't have the headspace to remember. I guess The Prestige is one of them, actually. And yeah, and then the other scenario is where they actually abandon their work and abandon their mission and decide to, I'll just head out with my family. And I wonder if that Nolan's anguish as a filmmaker as well, and those two endings are almost the two paths he sees in his life based on his art and his commitments at home.
Yeah, I wonder. I haven't ever really watched Nolan films wondering how they serve as like a portrait of their author, but hearing you talk about it, it definitely makes sense. You wonder, like, to achieve this level of greatness and control and scale, there must be some serious personal sacrifices. I have to confess, I actually didn't pick up on that sea people thing that you're saying. It's a neat narrative twist that it's revealed that they're in the sea people, but I missed that. I don't know if that was me not concentrating or if it was like a Nolan sound design line of dialogue that I just couldn't hear or something. But yeah, it's a long movie, and I guess I just eventually forgot about the sea people, or I was never really thinking about them too much, but whenever it was mentioned, I was like, oh yeah, sea people, we'll get them later. And then I actually, until you mentioned them now, I'd completely forgotten about them. And yeah, Matt Damon, like I said, I liked him. I thought he was good. I thought he was definitely as good as he can be in this role. I thought it was a good character, and I like Matt Damon, and I thought it was a good performance by him, particularly in some moments, like the final confrontation with Robert Pattinson, for example. Maybe it's a bit harsh, but I wondered after watching the film if there was like my mind sort of went to, what if this person had played him? What if that person played him? I think there could have been even more epic versions of this character by other actors, but maybe I would have liked that less. I don't know. And I suppose, like I said, I think of him in very modern terms, but I didn't really struggle with that throughout the movie. So yeah, you brought a lot of interesting stuff to the table in the points that you've made about this film. So yeah, I'm glad to be on the Nolan train again, but I do anticipate that when I see the size of the train, I'm actually going to feel that I'm just sort of running along behind it and not emphatically at the front to labor a analogy.
Your mailbox is full. Please delete new or stored messages which you no longer need so that new messages may be received.